Folks, welcome to this month's Voices of API Communities briefing with critical insights on timely policy issues impacting our nation. My name is Tracy Fung. I am Programs and Operations Manager at API Data, and I will be your moderator for today. I am especially thrilled to be welcoming Assembly Member Mike Fong, representing the 49th District of the California State Assembly. He also serves as chair of the API Legislative Caucus and chair of the Assembly Higher Education Committee. Welcome, Assembly Member Fong.
Thank you so much, Tracy, for that warm introduction, and good afternoon to each and every one of you. Happy Asian American Pacific Islander American Heritage Month, and it's wonderful to join you here for this wonderful Voices of AAPI Communities to discuss the perspectives of AAPI community members. I'm grateful to Karthik, to the entire team here for the invitation to join you here today. As we celebrate AAPI Heritage Month, we celebrate the diverse cultures that make our communities special. And thank you so much to Karthik, the entire team, for the invitation to join you here today. This is actually the second panel that we've sat on together. So I look forward to hearing the top line findings and reactions from Karthik, from Bob, from Greg, and the entire team here today. We're so grateful for your leadership and service. As you just heard, I have the distinct honor of serving as your chair of the API Legislative Caucus for the state of California, as well as chair of the Assembly Higher Education Committee. In those roles, ensuring that higher education, college access, that all Californians have access to high quality and affordable higher education is one of my top priorities. And we know in California that's more important than ever. The impact that it makes for our students from all walks of life, not just our individual students, for the entire families and communities. And as our state and country faces instability economically and otherwise, API communities are certainly feeling pressure from that uncertainty going forward. But as you see from today's presentation, what remains consistent is our community's belief in the power and promise of higher education to transform lives in our community. And now, education policy across the nation is facing a reckoning right now with the federal administration's dismantling of the Department of Education and the defunding of DEI initiatives. What has not changed is that the majority of AAPIs believe that a four-year degree is essential and important for getting a job that can support their family, for having the ability to change jobs more easily, for increasing wealth and minimizing debt, and for being an engaged, civically minded citizen. And as California faces a tough budget year ahead with potential cuts in many different areas, the majority of APIs continue to believe that education spending should in fact be increased. And that's why I'm glad that in the governor's May revise, the initial proposed 7.95% cut to the University of California and California State University systems would have been devastating. That now has been reduced to 3%. While any cuts are not welcome, these are unfortunately the realities that we face in these uncertain budget times, and we must minimize the impact to our students directly. And we must continue to make education institutions places of opportunity. And that's why I'm proud to carry bills this legislative session that expands workforce development, that expands dual enrollment programs, that looks at expanding student housing opportunities and housing for our faculty and staff. We face an affordability crisis in California. And as an API Legislative Caucus, we've heard that on the ground during our town hall meetings in the San Jose Bay Area and during town hall meetings in the San Gabriel Valley, Southern California area, and really want to uplift the priorities of our API Legislative Caucus around protecting immigrant communities, around expanding education opportunities, and also looking at how we can create more affordable housing opportunities. AAPI community organizations and leaders feel the strain from these budget cuts as well, from increased immigration enforcement to higher costs. We must do everything possible to continue to support our diverse API communities and all our groups here today. I see NCAPA, API Data, APIAVote, and all the groups involved here today, AAJ as well. So thank you so much to all of you for being here today. We know conversations like this are critical as we continue to inform our policy priorities going forward and the path going forward. And I'm so grateful to all of you for joining us here today for these very important conversations during API Heritage Month and going forward. And thank you so much again to AAPI Data for bringing us together, and to APIAVote, to Christine and the entire team there, to NCAPA, to Greg and the entire team, and all of you for sharing your perspectives and insights across California and across our nation. I'm so grateful to join you in the space here today and look forward to hearing from everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Assembly Member Fong, for those remarks. And we are grateful for your leadership and those of others to make sure that policies that are being passed reflect the interests and needs of our community, especially with regard to education. We have some fantastic folks that are going to be joining us, both to present the data as well as to discuss the impacts of this data. Before we get started, I'd like to thank our partners, APIAVote, the Asian American Journalists Association, and NCAPA for today's briefing, as well as the Associated Press and NORC for their ongoing partnership. The Voices of AAPI briefings are an incredibly important resource of data and insights for our communities regarding timely policy and social issues. If you have any questions for the group, please do drop them in the Q&A, which can be found on your Zoom menu screen. We'll try to get to all of them. I do also want to let you all know that we will have some time for a Q&A session later on. I'd like to start us off today by welcoming Karthik Ramakrishna, founder and executive director of API Data, to get us started and to review the main findings of the survey. Over to you, Karthik.
Thank you, Tracy, and thank you everyone for being with us on a very critical day, just given the news that came out from Congress in terms of the House passing a budget resolution or budget bill that is now going to the Senate and will likely come back to the House. We have a lot of ground to cover. In addition to the findings that you see here today, you will see key findings from prior surveys organized by topic area through our resource guides. So if you just go to our main website, or if you go to that QR code and you click on resource guides, you will see this Voices of Community guide that gives us the latest information that we have on a variety of issues. We're going to be taking a deep dive into education and the state of the economy, as well as opinion on taxes and the size of government today. But know that many of these topics have been covered in prior surveys, and we really hope that you can use this information in the important educative role you need to play with your constituencies, as well as with your representatives. And as one of the examples, we were just thrilled to see NCAPA today, literally the day after we released this survey, to use our findings to set in context where our communities stand on the issue of tax cuts for the wealthy, as well as cuts to social services. So we really value all of your help in not just elevating the fact that these data points exist, but to the extent that people say, we don't know where our community stands on these issues, that you use this as important information in the work ahead. Thank you. Let's go to the next slide. So here are some of the major findings. And the way I'll frame this up, we heard from the Assembly member about how education is so vital to the state of California. It's vital nationally, and it's vital to our communities. We've consistently seen in the past in public opinion data that our communities value education in a very big way and to increase government spending on education. But I want to take a step back. That is more fundamental to why many of us or our parents came to this country in the first place. It is with a kind of optimism about the economy and the belief that the next generation will do better than the current generation. What we find is that when it comes to the short term, as well as the longer term, most APIs are not optimistic about the national economy or the way things are going overall. We're going to talk a lot about education today, but when it comes to the economy, most APIs favor tax cuts for small businesses rather than large corporations. And they favor tax cuts for lower income households as well as middle income households rather than wealthy households. We also find that APIs are concerned about increases in student loan debt, as well as restrictions to free speech on college campuses and federal cuts to university research. Think about this as the goose that lays the golden egg for this country, and many APIs are very concerned about these various threats to our higher education system. Next slide. A small minority of APIs believe they have a good chance of improving their standard of living. Oh, sorry. Only a small minority of APIs believe that their children essentially will be better off than them. And that should be a flashing warning sign. This will likely have an impact on those already living in this country. But for a community, especially Asian American community, that grows because of international migration, it starts pointing to a possible future where we will see fewer people wanting to come to the United States because of this pessimism that is starting to creep in. On the positive side, most APIs believe that a college degree is important or essential for economic mobility. So what we think is important when we pair these results is that this pessimism is not inevitable. If we continue down this track of disinvesting in higher education, it will become a problem. It's already becoming a problem. But it is possible to turn that around with investments in education and in our country's future. And then finally, we find a relative stability in this data point. So over a decade ago, the Pew Research Center found that over 60% of Asian Americans would prefer bigger government providing more services rather than smaller government providing fewer services. And it's remarkable how stable that finding is even today, more than a decade later, where 60.
So for the findings that Karthik just reviewed, of course, I've been for APAHI tracked very closely the federal impacts on higher education, especially for our ANAPI communities in both the community colleges and also four-year institutions. So some of the key takeaways for me are that our AAPI communities are very concerned about the impacts on higher education right now with the changes in federal policy, the dismantling of the Department of Education, the uncertainty about our university research funding, uncertainty about funding for our minority serving institutions, such as our Asian American, Native American, Pacific Islander serving institutions, and then certainly the attacks on our immigrant communities, not only our undocumented students, but our international students as well. But in terms of the findings, I am very heartened, and optimistic that there is still a strong belief in college, that college will allow our students and their families and their communities to advance skill, and then also that among the community that there's also support for on continuing our diversity, equity, and inclusion programs because we know that the majority of our students are coming from very, very diverse backgrounds. And that type of programming just leads to a sense of belonging and welcoming for our students, which we know research tells us increases student engagement with their academics and also leads to student success. So those are some of the takeaways for me in terms of what Karthik reviewed.
Thanks so much, Rowena. I want to hand it over to Bob. I'd like to hear your reactions to these findings as well.
Thanks so much, Tracy, and thanks for having me here to speak on behalf of APIAVote. I think one of the most interesting things actually is that as Karthik mentioned at the top, just early this morning, the House of Representatives passed its version of the budget reconciliation bill, and it's 1,100-page behemoth. In any such legislation that large, things can be tucked in that were agreed to at the last minute in order to wrangle some votes here and there. So, you know, it's gonna take, you know, a few days to kind of find out what's been buried in there. The vote was a very close one, 215 to 214. And so it certainly was not a slam dunk. And so I think, and because, you know, it's on the issue of, you know, our government's budget for the next 10 years, I think, you know, the focus of this particular survey is right on point in terms of the economy and you know, tax policy as you know, the country moves forward or tries to move forward. And I think the other kind of interesting issues kind of wrapped up in here do include things that were topics in previous surveys, AP NORC surveys that were done and that we spoke about that address the topic of immigration and healthcare and other key issues that are certainly wrapped up in the budget reconciliation measure. I just saw real quickly in the chat, there was a question about when will this actually pass, which is an excellent question. I think a lot of the prognosticators were probably surprised that the bill actually got out of the House prior to the Memorial Day break. That was not going to be a for sure thing to begin with, but seeing that it did pass this morning, I think the next step for this reconciliation bill is to move over to the Senate. And there's going to be much more wrangling in the Senate. It's a different body, and each senator, even regardless of party, has a lot of influence and ability to impact how this budget reconciliation gets ultimately shaped. And again, as Karthik mentioned, it's likely to have to come back to the House once the Senate has had its opportunity to prioritize issues as they see fit. I think the big thing, and I'm sorry to go off on the budget reconciliation here so much, but the big thing about this bill is that it can't be filibustered in the Senate. So there will be a lot of intense debate as the Congress returns from the Memorial break. There will be 1 week of quiet on Capitol Hill during the Memorial Week recess, but then it will pick up again very intensely this time in the Senate as they try to move this bill forward. Just to get back to Tracy's question, I think what really jumps out at me in this survey that just came out is where the AAPI community stands in general is, you know, on the one hand, I think very clear that people are having questions and concerns about the direction the country's headed, but at the same time, we know that in 2024, our voter turnout was just like the mainstream population. The voter turnout was slightly depressed in 2024, and I feel like what we're seeing with these surveys that have been coming out every month or every other month is that there's a huge need for voter education and making sure our community understands what the implications of some of these big policy changes are. Because I think if you measure where we are on these surveys to what's happening being developed policy-wise in Washington, D.C., for our community anyways, there's a huge disconnect. But whether that's being translated to the community is you know, another question and the challenge for many of our groups. But I'll pause there and let Tracy let you move on.
Thanks so much, Bob. And I'd like to turn to you now, Greg, for your initial and immediate reactions to these findings?
I mean, my first reaction is whoever had the foresight to time these results coming out when they did deserves a massive raise, right? So major kudos. Sorry about the phone in the background, but major kudos to API Data, APIAVote, AP North, the Journalists Association. Sometimes timing is beautiful, and this is one of those moments where it really did make a difference. I would say beyond that, there's two things that I want everyone to remember. One is a stat that Karthik highlighted that the slides do. The survey data shows, which is a large majority of our community believe that higher income folks should be taxed higher, lower income folks should be taxed lower. Pretty simple concept. So that's number one. The second one is based on some projections by some very smart economists, 80% of the people who are going to benefit from this bill, which is basically you, me, and mostly everybody on this call, they're going to receive about 29% of the benefit of these tax cuts, which means the math is all upside down, right? The other 20% is receiving the vast majority of the benefits of these tax cuts. And it goes to the point that a lot of my colleagues have been making, which is what has been passed in the House of Representatives is just incredibly out of touch with the priorities and preferences and views of our community. There was a question, I think, in the chat about whether or not the bill that was, or the bill that was passed out of the House contributed to a balanced budget. I think the Congressional Budget Office estimated that these tax cuts would add somewhere in the range of like $3 to $5 trillion in debt to the United States. And so I think that's a pretty stark number as well, especially given that there's at least so many proposed fiscal hawks in Congress, but it didn't seem to matter when it comes to tax cuts. So again, there's lots to unpack here. Bob said it well. It's over 1,000 pages long. There's things we're still learning about. What we can say is we have a pretty good sense of what's in there based on the debate and deliberations that's been happening in all of the committees. And so for those of you who haven't been following the process, every committee was giving marching orders by Republican leadership to find savings in the programs and the agencies that they oversee. And since we spent a lot of time focusing on higher education and education in general, I can say that if I'm recalling correctly, there was somewhere in the range of like $350 billion in cuts to education programs. So that means K through 12 as well as higher ed. I would anticipate that if this became law, there would be changes to Pell Grant eligibility, the excise tax that's put on endowments for our institutions of higher education likely to be tweaked. I mean, there's just a number of really significant changes that will directly impact our community's ability to access quality education.
Thanks so much, Greg. Rowena, I want to come back to you and dig a bit deeper. Some of the federal actions are affecting higher education. What are ways in which you and APAHI are communicating these actions and effects to your members and to the community at large?
So Tracy, I think Rowena had some technical issues where she was, so we'll maybe come back to her. Hopefully she's able to rejoin the Zoom.
All right, then Bob, I'll move on to you. The survey shows generational differences in how API adults view economic and education issues. How do you factor these divides into your policy advocacy work and strategies for building civic power across age groups?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it kind of goes to the heart of, the challenges we face in the civic engagement world. Getting people to vote is generally a challenge if it's not part of their regular routine, and kind of understanding regarding the importance of the democratic process and democracy in general. So it's a very important question. I think some of the difference between the younger voting age group and older voting age group, arise, because as Karthik alluded to, students and youth are closer to some of these issues happening on our campuses, whether it's seeing people arrested for exercising their First Amendment rights, or cuts in curriculum and other programs important to their identities and ability to organize. That obviously tends to motivate people, but there's still a disconnect in terms of capturing that energy that is clearly there with the younger voters, and connecting that to the need to vote and be civically engaged. I think past surveys have shown that one of the reasons younger potential voters don't vote is because they don't think they understand the process well enough, or don't have enough information on how to go about the electoral process. And those are things that we can focus on as an organization, educating about the voting process itself, and making sure that students have the opportunity to organize and do things like voter drives and any other civic engagement related activities. So we do have within our organization a department specifically focused on youth voters, younger voters still in college, and making sure that they have the information and resources to be able to engage their fellow students in the voting process. So that's basically how we approach targeting youth voters.
Thanks so much, Bob, for those insights. I think, Rowena, you had some technical difficulties, but you're back with us.
Yes, I am.
Okay, perfect.
Me, okay? Yes, so I think
okay.
the question that you had asked, do you want to go ahead and ask the question
Yes.
again?
Sure. So the question was, some of the federal actions are affecting higher education. What are the ways in which you and APAHI are communicating these actions and effects to your members and to the community at large?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. I think I'll start with just the storytelling and our emphasis on making visible what our students are experiencing right now across our community colleges and also our universities, not only in the mainland United States, but also in the territory. So students focus on the attacks on our undocumented students, and then also the international visa revocation policy that came about. So this has created anxiety, so much fear amongst our students, and they are grappling with even questioning if they're going to be able to complete their academic programs or complete their degrees. I know firsthand in terms of some of the monitoring and tracking that we've been doing, especially from the APIAVote institutions who are API serving, that they've been sharing reports, that some of their Dreamers services and their centers, students are even worried about being in those spaces. And those are spaces that were created, for belonging for the students, because they fear that ICE, will be coming onto campuses and that they will not be protected. Likewise, I've had the privilege and opportunity recently to attend a few international student celebrations, because May and June are the times that we celebrate graduations and the success of our students, which is also about the success of their families and their communities. And, students were, grateful to the support that they were receiving on their campuses from counselors, from faculty, from institutions that were putting out resources for them, and which included resources for mental health, to address the fear that they're feeling right now, because these types of changes in federal policy, again, as I mentioned earlier, it makes them feel like they are not wanted, that they don't belong, that and that they're not going to be able to continue to pursue their academic dreams, which we know lead to professional dreams, and for education, really leading to advancing socioeconomic mobility and getting into the workforce to give back, to their community. So additionally, what APAHI has been doing is we do have a research group that we've been supporting in the past year. So we're also taking in this information from many institutions, and they are telling us the other potential impacts in terms of the funding cuts that might happen and funding cuts that have already happened in terms of our research universities. And we know that, that has a ripple effect, and will cause brain drain, in terms of our country and our ability to really, stay at the forefront of innovation, which we then also want to support our communities. So there's worry about that. And then lastly, I'll share that APAHI as an organization has been supporting, again, our ANAPISI institutions for at least 15 years now. And so there is a great worry that the funding will not be there, that there won't be another competition because of what's happened. And if that funding is not available, that means that institutions don't have access and don't have the capacity to provide those academic supports, tutoring, counseling services, mental health services, and then for students so that they can, again, persist in college and then graduate. And then for community college students, the dream is to transfer to a four-year university and then complete their degrees. So we're doing a number of things and partnering with institutions and organizations such as those that are here participating in the webinar. And I do want to give a shout out to NCAPA, for their coordination, of many of the different organizations across sectors, including higher education, so that we could keep advocating for our communities and our institutions.
Thank you so much, Rowena, for sharing and kind of laying out the general atmosphere in regards to education and the work that APAHI is doing. Greg, I want to come to you. What do the survey findings on the economy and federal budget say about the policy priorities AAPI communities want addressed, and how is NCAPA working to elevate these concerns on Capitol Hill?
Thanks, Tracy. And I would say, like I said earlier, based on what was passed in the House, based on what the White House has been advocating for, their priorities are way out of touch with the priorities of our community, right? And Poulin, if I'm mispronouncing your name, please forgive me. Thank you for putting a finer point on that earlier point I made, which is, again, 80% of income earners are only going to get 29% the tax cut benefits based on some projections by economists at UPenn. That is upside down. And I think for me, something everyone should understand is my understanding of what was passed is that just about everyone is going to get some form of tax cut, which means more money in their pocket. And all things being equal, that's a good thing. I'm not mad at it. But the question we have to ask is at what cost, right? Because if we're hollowing out education, if we're making healthcare more expensive, the cost of living are staying high, and we're basically gutting federal government, what is the value of a $5,000 tax cut when your community around you, the other parts of your community, other people who live in your neighborhoods are struggling? We're creating conditions for abject poverty, and we're not going to feel it immediately. Again, these are 10-year projections. If this becomes law, we will truly see lower income folks struggle even more. The middle class will continue to struggle, and the rich will continue to get richer. And I think the polling and the survey data that API data led really gets to the heart of this. Our community very clearly believes that investing in everyone is something we believe in. And I do think it's a function of being an immigrant community, right? Coming to this country, believing that there's opportunity, and then also believing that finding your people and finding a place to live and build a family is important and worthwhile investing in. This tax bill, this tax plan does very much the opposite. And I think it's something that, like Bob said earlier, it's our job to educate our communities, because in many ways, this is a super wonky topic of tax policy, tax code, all of those things. But the real impact, it's hurtling down, the highway towards us. Obviously, it has to get through the Senate. It's likely that there'll be changes. But the truth is, like, the administration and those who have passed this bill in the House have made very clear what their priorities are, and we should be paying attention.
Thanks so much, Greg. And Karthik, I want to bring you into this as well. Any reactions to the perspective so far before we move on to a short audience Q&A?
Yeah, no, just yes to everything Greg just said, and others as well, including what Rowena talked about, the critical importance of education as an investment in our future, and that also starts paying dividends right now. Right, the economic value of investing in education and higher education cannot be understated. So this is very much kind of cutting off your nose to spite your face, right? In terms of whatever cultural wars that certain people want to engage in should not come at the suffering of our economy or the suffering of our young people's futures. And those are the stakes that are very real right now. I should also say that when it comes to favoring more government and more services, as well as favoring lower income and middle class tax cuts rather than higher income tax cuts, it's not just low and middle income APIs who believe that. We find that income has no statistically significant relationship. What does that mean? That means that even higher income APIs support bigger government providing more services. Higher income APIs support prioritizing tax cuts for lower income and middle income people and not people like them. This is important. This is something we found over a decade ago in 2012 when we ran the National Asian American Survey. We found a similar kind of finding, and that might puzzle some people. I remember reporters asking me that at the time. Why would someone want to raise their own taxes? Well, they see the societal benefit that happens when you provide services, when people aren't starving, where people are not dying prematurely, right? Which is what Medicaid cuts would do. So that's something for us to keep in mind, to educate ourselves, to not just assume that because you are high income, that you want to see tax cuts for high income people. This is a pretty consistent finding we've seen now, is that high income Asian Americans, high income APIs in this instance, in this latest survey, support government providing that social safety net, and they support paying higher taxes in order to be able to do so.
Thanks so much, Karthik. We are approaching the top of the hour. I don't see any questions in the Q&A, but I know folks have been active in the chat. We do have one coming in. I think we have time for this one. Carlo has asked us, thank you for the informative presentation today. Rowena touched on this earlier, but I'm curious to know what you all believe are the biggest challenges to civically engaging AAPI communities going into 2026, 2028. So if one of you
Yeah, I'll
would like to
start,
take that
and
on.
then someone asked in the Q&A too. Yeah, there's, in terms of calls to action, folks, I mean, we at API Data, we produce the research and we hope others will take action. So when people do not take action, we start getting impatient, and especially on an issue like education. And it's not just because we're based in a university. We know from many years of data that our community mobilizes when they feel that their access to education is under threat. Now, some of that may be misinformed or misguided, but it is what it is. That's the powerful motivator. The reason why people came to this country, right? Why they think about education, maybe even obsess about education. They see it as the key driver to economic mobility. Whereas other communities might think of housing as their key driver of economic mobility, our community thinks of education. This is the time to act. If there ever was a code red situation when it came to the future of our communities and education as that key driver of mobility and change, it is now. So that would be my call to action. API data can't jump into action, but we do have DNA, right? Data narrative action. We call on others, and we're grateful for APAHI for their partnership, and we're building a stronger partnership with them. These are two NCAPA organizations that are deepening their partnerships. But if you look at NCAPA as a coalition, right, and the council and the staff there, as well as many other members, this is what it will take. But of course, not just on education. I mean, this is like so many things under attack right now. To have a budget that reflects our values, and then importantly, to insist that are members of Congress, regardless of party, and that includes people that may share the same party as many folks, is to hold them to account, to exercise narrative leadership, to show what an alternate budget would look like, and to be able to communicate that effectively to our communities, and to make sure that we can fight for a budget that we want, as opposed to just having something handed to us.
Thanks so much, Karthik. Bob, Greg, Rowena, last call to action before we close.
I would say, as a civic engagement organization, my simple message would be, now is the time to organize, to find out who the people are that are like-minded and care about these issues, and organize, because that's the only way to get the message out, get people registered, get them to vote, and make an impact. But I know we're at time, so I'll leave it at that.
I'm just unmuting really quickly because, again, I just signing on with what Bob and Karthik just said as well. APAHI's, two prongs of our mission are education and to advocate. And so in addition to just organizing within our communities, which is really critical to keep doing that education work, really amplifying the stories of not just our students, right, but our elders, our young people and how they're impacted, I think will move our communities. But it's also to work outside of our ANAPI communities in terms of organizing. Let's work with our other partners in allyship, to advance their communities as well. Because the more that we can get involved, especially in preparation for the midterm election, I am optimistic, that folks will be coming out to vote, especially with organizations such as yours, Bob. And I know that you're working in partnership with many, many organizations, not just our ANAPI communities. So thank you.
Great, wonderful. I think that's a perfect way to end the convert.
Well, maybe we can ask. Well, I'm curious to hear Greg's thoughts, actually.
Yeah, Greg.
So, Greg, because I mean, there's a lot of talk about the midterms, but if you can kind of sketch out what does it look like for us to be engaged in the budget process,
Yeah,
this
thanks, Karthik.
in the next few weeks.
Yeah, as we mentioned, this bill passed the House. It's going to the Senate. It will go through a pretty exhaustive deliberative process, but all this time will give anyone who is interested in calling their member of Congress or their senator an advocate. Let them know that you oppose or you support. I'm not going to tell you which one to do. It's just simply we have to get engaged, right? And CAPA clearly opposes what has been proposed, but there is a window of time and a window of opportunity that every single one of us has to make sure that we advocate, to make sure our voices are heard, and more importantly, bring some friends along, right? Like it doesn't just have to be you. This is a moment in which we have to mobilize our entire community, like others have said. And if we sit on the sidelines on this one, things like this will continue to move forward, and we will continue to have conversations about the impact and lament the fact that we had a chance to perhaps influence, persuade, and convince the decision makers to move it in a different direction. So I really do plus up everything that everyone else has said.
Great. Thanks so much, Greg. Yeah, I think that's a really great and uplifting way to end the conversation. We need to educate, act, organize with our communities and outside of our communities, and advocate. The data is there. Folks, please make sure to go check it out. It is available on our website, and the link is also in the chat. Thank you so much for your engagement and participation in today's briefing. Please do continue to stay up to date with these latest findings at AAPI Data and API North websites, and feel free to reach out with any questions. And lastly, a huge thank you to our panelists today, Assembly Member Mike Bong, Rowena, Bob, Greg, and Karthik. Thanks so much, everyone, and we'll see you next time.